You see the same thing in criminal behavior. Hardly anyone is a criminal.
Yeah.
Then if you take the fraction of people who are criminals, most of them are like 1-2-time criminals, right?
Yep.
But there's a professional hardcore group that commit all the crimes.
Yeah.
Well, it's the same thing with sexual assault and sexual harassment. Well, you don't want to confuse the action of some of the men with all of the men. Like, it's really important to get that distinction right, and we're not getting that distinction right at all.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you, is that it's critical to differentiate first of all, among the offenses, surely.
Well, you'd hope so.
And among the perpetrators or alleged perpetrators. And yet now the discussion seems to be turning to almost an attack on the masculinity of corporations, hierarchies and in companies. And how is it possible that we don't recognize, well, we do, most of us, but there's that minimum at one end, and then there's somebody who's sexually assaulting women, physically raping women.
Well, some of it is that there's a concerted effort on the part of the radical postmodern left to erase the distinction between categories of criminal behavior.
Categories is all we got.
Yeah, but the postmodernists don't like categories. You see, that's if you go way down into the structure of the current culture wars, what you see is that at the very base of it, there's two things that the postmodern neo-Marxists they're full-scale assaulting. One is categorization, because they believe that the only function of categorization is power. The other one is that there's a war on competence, because if you admit that there are hierarchical structures that are predicated on competence, then you have to grapple with the issue of competence, and you have to grapple with the issue of valid hierarchy. If all hierarchy is power and all power is corrupt and all corrupt power is tyranny, then you can't admit to competence. But the downside, there's a terrible price to be paid for that, because every value system produces a hierarchy. So if you dispense with the hierarchy, you dispense with the value systems.
Recently, the founding director and creative director, I think he was, Albert Schultz from the Soul Pepper Theatre Company, was the latest in Canada to be accused of what sounds like a pretty wide range of offenses. Why are women coming forward now about events that happened 15 or 20 years ago?
Okay, well, let's address that two ways. I mean, the first, there's been an adolescent insistence since the early 60s that sexual behavior can be rule-free. Now, a lot of that was generated as a consequence of the birth control pill, right? Because it was like, that's a biological revolution. All right, all of a sudden women can control their reproductive function in principle. Question one, what does that make women? Because now they're a new biological entity, right?
Yeah.
And so it's wide open. What are women now? We don't know. The next thing that's wide open is, well, maybe there are no rules for sex then. There's an impulsive part of human beings, it's associated with the sexual drive, obviously, that would love it if there were no rules governing sexual behavior, because then it would be all orgies all the time with no consequences, right? And so, but the problem is that all of that's untrue, because you can't divorce sexuality from emotion. You also can't divorce it from responsibility. You can't divorce it from family. You can't divorce it from respect. You can't divorce it from children. Like, it's so central. You can't divorce it from power. You can't divorce it from tyranny or love. Like, it's central, and it involves all those other things. And so there are rules. The question is, what are the rules? And the answer is, no one knows. So there's going to be mistakes everywhere, all the time. Where do you draw the line between a sexual invitation and harassment? Well, like a cynic would say, anything unwanted is harassment. Well, how the hell is the person who's making the offer supposed to determine that beforehand?
Yeah, you make the offer or the invitation in part to find out
whether
if
it's welcome.
Wanted.
Yes, and the terrible thing about that in part is that it's almost always men who do that. Right? Men make the offer. And almost always it's rejected. And it's almost always rejected even by women who might be interested under some circumstances.
Yeah.
Now, the reason for that, as far as I can tell, is that women bear a much heavier price for sexual activity than men do. So they're the ones that are going to say no. The problem is that we need to know exactly where the rules are, and we don't.
In this climate, though, where we're not sure of the rules, we're not sure where the lines are, when does a glance become a sexual offense?
Well, it's a sexual offense right away if it's a microaggression.
Tell people what a microaggression is. I think we all hear that now, and we're not really sure what it means. I'm not, anyway.
A microaggression is any act, no matter how subtle, that makes the recipient uncomfortable regardless of the intent of the perpetrator.
Good grief.
Right.
Good grief.
Yeah, because we're getting away from intent, eh?
Yeah.
It's all consequence.
It's all how it's received.
Yes. And and that's being written into the law very rapidly, by the way. So we're moving from a legal system where intent matters to a legal system where consequences matter, which is really the eradication of the legal system. But it doesn't matter because the postmodern radicals who increasingly occupy the law schools believe that Western law is a patriarchal and oppressive tradition, and that undermining it and destroying it by doing things like removing due process and insisting on preponderance of evidence and going for consequence rather than intent, that's fine because all they're doing is tearing down a terrible tyrannical patriarchal structure. Having never had the fortune to spend any time in an Iranian prison, for example, they're not very good at distinguishing between what constitutes a tyranny and what constitutes a free society.
Until we figure all this stuff out, assuming we will at some point, the sexual stuff I'm talking about, can ordinary men and ordinary women continue to work together?
A lot of it's emergent self-protection. You know, men say, don't ever have a meeting with a woman when the door's closed.
Yeah.
In fact, I've been told that at the university.
Yeah.
Never have a meeting with a student with the door closed. It's like I ignore that because there's no damn way I'm doing that. But that's common practice. I don't know the answer to whether or not men and women can work together en masse because it's not under the current conditions. We don't have the rules right.